Hi everybody, welcome back to our educational series of Aurora's True Nature videos. My name is Joy Thompson and I'm the lead naturalist with Aurora Open Space. And today we're doing another part to our Ancient Aurora program. So hopefully by now you've had a chance to watch and play with and interact with the interactive rock cycle video. Hopefully you had a chance to act out the rock cycle and you had a chance to maybe do a few other activities. Remember what I said before, that we can tell what happened before we were here by the stories that the rocks tell us. And remember I said that that's the story that's told by science. But the cool thing about that is that there's actually a very visual way to see that. So before I start, I do want to remind you that there are some pre-questions for you to look at. Make sure you have a chance to take a look at those and stop the video and answer those if you need to do that. And there will be some post-questions afterward as well. So it's hard to imagine the stories told in the rocks because they're told over a period of millions of years. And millions of years is really hard for us to think about because the average lifespan of a person is, how many of you think you might know? Well, the lifespan of a person keeps growing, but typically we don't last beyond 100, 105, 110 years at the outside. Like that's how some really, really older people are. So when we talk about millions of years, it's hard to imagine that. But what I want you to do is imagine how long you think it would take you to count to 1 million if you count like this. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. It would actually take you 11 days to do that, to get to 1 million, if you counted that way. And that's a long time. If you tried to do that to count to 1 billion, it would take you 32 years. And a trillion, I don't even think you'd be alive by the time we hit that number. So we're talking very, very long periods of time, so it's kind of hard for us to understand. So a few years ago, some paleontologists and artists got together and formed a project with the Denver Museum of Nature and Science called the Ancient Denvers Project. And Ancient Denvers, what the artists did is they made a series of paintings that showed us what the Denver area looked like according to paleontologists from 300 million years ago up until about 16,000 years ago. And that helps people like us to be able to look and see what this area might have looked like according to the story in the rocks. So we're actually going to do a timeline today to show you a little bit about that story. And we're going to start with 300 million years ago, okay? So this picture here is what we call ancestral mountain views. And those mountains that you're looking at, yeah, this is Colorado. This is Colorado about 300 million years ago. And those mountains that you're looking at are not the Rocky Mountains we have now. According to the fossil record, that story told in the rocks, there have been 3 sets of Rocky Mountains, and this was actually the first one. So at this point in time, we have a couple of interesting things to point out. First of all, if you look at the trees and the plants, what color are they? That is right, they're green, but the whole thing is green, which shows that there's no differentiation in these plants. There were some stems, but there's no leaves. Every part of this tree was photosynthesizing. Every part of this tree, of these plants, was able to make oxygen, versus now, it just happens in the leaves. We also have a couple of critters in here. We have this guy right here, and we have some fossil plants that don't necessarily show in this video, on this picture, but there are some plants that the fossil record that scientists have actually dated back to this time period. And they look a little bit like this. So you may recognize these plants. Some people call it puzzle grass. It's also known as scouring rush, or just a rush in general. And these are actually plants that date all the way back to that 300 million year ago time period. So if you've picked up and played with a piece of puzzle grass, guess what? You've picked up and played with a plant whose ancestors have been around for 300 million years, and that's a long, long, long time. So if we move a little bit forward in time, we get to what we call Submarine Aurora, okay? Now a submarine goes where? It goes underwater, that's right. Well, at this point in time, Aurora was underwater, okay? How many of you see the land in this picture? Anybody see any land? I hope the answer is no, because there isn't any. There's no land in this picture at all. Because according to the fossil record, Aurora was 500 feet underwater at this point in time. Can you imagine your house being 500 feet underwater? Can you imagine some of the creatures that have lived at this time? So the animal that you're seeing here is called a pterosaur. Some folks call them a pterodactyl. Those are actually some different animals. These pterosaurs were about the size of a school bus, which is pretty big, and they did their hunting above. So if you were out going for a swim at this time, you might end up being a snack for a pterosaur. Now there's another creature that was around at this period of time. And he's kind of a cool looking creature, and I wanted to show him to you guys. So this creature is called a plesiosaur, okay? And this is about how big he really was. So could you imagine swimming out at Aurora Reservoir and this guy swims up next to you? Now, according to what scientists believe, he was pretty polite, so he might have been a nice creature to have swim up next to you, but I still think it might be a little bit intimidating. Now this one down here is called an ammonite, and these are all water creatures, so these are all creatures that, according to the fossil record, actually lived under the sea in Aurora 500 million years ago, during a time when we had a lot more water, okay? So I think that that's pretty cool. I hope that you guys think so too. But we're actually going to move forward in time now, because that was about 75 million years ago. So we're going to move forward now to about 65 million years ago, 66, 65 million years ago. And what we call this is finally the Rockies. So remember I said that there were 3 sets of Rockies? Well, by this point, a big uplift had happened, and that was called the Laramide orogeny. And when the Laramide orogeny happened, that produced the Rocky Mountains we know and that we spend time in today. So if you take a look at this picture, I can imagine that you see some pretty cool things in here. So, first of all, we can see lots of different plants. We can see different leaves, okay? We might also see some creatures in here. So if you see some creatures, stop the video. If you don't see them, stop the video and take a look at what you see here. And so I'm assuming you've turned the video back on. Let's take a look at some of the animals that we have in here. If you notice these guys, absolutely, okay? You've got some triceratops in here. Kind of cool. There's also another animal in here that might be a little bit more difficult to see. But if you noticed the giant leg down along this side, that's T-Rex. So we're talking about a period of time when T-Rex roamed the earth, and he was kind of the big guy, and he was the one that nobody wanted to mess with. He was the big bad hunter, okay? At this time, we also saw animals like turtles. Believe it or not, turtles were around at this time. So turtles have been part of our world for a very long time, according to the stories in the rocks, okay? Another creature who was around at this time was this guy. And at this time, this guy does not have a name, but take a look at how little he is. He's about the size of a rat, and that's really about the size that mammals got at about this period of time, because if you had big dinosaurs like T-Rex running around just waiting to rip your face off, you didn't really have the chance to grow and get very big, okay? But the plants and the leaves did, and we actually have some fossil evidence to prove that. So if you take a look at some of the leaves on this table back over here, these are actual fossils that were found out at Aurora Reservoir when they were digging and making the reservoir. And so we can see that contrary to now, when Aurora Reservoir is out on the prairie and there's not many plants with leaves out there, you can see that these plants actually have big leaves. And big leaves are the sign of an ecosystem that had a lot of water. Okay? Leaves are kind of the armpits of a plant, and they sweat a lot. And so if you have a lot of water, you need big armpits, you need big leaves to be able to sweat a lot. Okay? Now we're going to move forward to about 65 million years ago, and that is what we call after Armageddon. So according to the fossil record, according to what we now believe, an asteroid about the size of Denver hit the planet off the coast of Baja in Mexico and caused the extinction of 70% of the life that was on the planet at the time. After a few thousand years or so, things had a chance to settle down, and as you can see and take a look in this picture, it doesn't look very exciting. We have a creek, we have a lot of plants. So Colorado was pretty boring, but it was safe. Now the cool thing about this point in time is that because by this point the big dinosaurs, the big meat eaters, had gone extinct because of that asteroid, mammals had a chance to grow and proliferate. So if we take a look at our next picture, This one is called First Rainforest. At this point in time, we're talking about a period maybe 64 million years ago where there was a lot of water. You can see a lot of green, you can see a lot of moss growing on the trees, you can see a lot of plants with big leaves. You also see this big animal in here, and he has a funny name. He's called a Stylonodontine taniodont. And he was about the size of a raccoon. So again, compared to that little mouse we saw before, mammals have really had a lot of a chance to grow. Okay? Moving forward, we've got just a couple pictures left. Our next picture is called Red Dirt World. Okay, and this is about 55 million years ago, and at this point, it was believed, according to the fossil record, that the Earth was an intense period of global warming, which meant that there were no polar ice caps, and things were a lot warmer than they are now. We actually, in this picture, can see not only these little creatures here called a coryphodon, and those were about the size of a hippo, but we have some animals back here that may look familiar. We have some crocodiles. Yes, crocodiles were around at that time. They actually have been around since the time of the dinosaurs, since before that extinction, and they've made it through a lot. We have evidence of this time period in Aurora, in the southeast Aurora area, where we have some petrified wood. And you can see some petrified wood over here on the table. That's wood that has gone through that fossilization process. We kind of talked about when we were talking about the rock cycle. So petrified wood is a good sign that those trees have been around for a very long time. Now in Aurora, the oldest trees are cottonwoods, which live for about 100 years. These trees show that trees in Aurora used to live for much, much longer than that. And then finally, last but never least, if you've seen the movie Ice Age, these guys might look familiar to you. We call this picture Ice Age Summer, okay? And these are the Rocky Mountains right now. And as you can see, we have some mammoths in there. We have kind of an ancestor of the camel. And at this time, evidence of saber-toothed tigers were found in this area. And this was only about 10,000 years ago, or 16,000 years ago, okay? So at this point in time, we don't have any evidence of humans, but we do have evidence that these guys actually lived right here in the Denver area. In fact, mammoth skeletons were found in Littleton, believe it or not, okay? So although we can't necessarily hear the stories telling their rocks, we have people, hear the rocks telling their stories. We have people who've done the research and people who've made the drawings to show us that we can learn about what our planet looked like before we were around by reading the stories in the rocks. So now it's time for you to go and look at your post questions, okay? And see what you can remember from the video and answer some questions for your teacher. We'll see you for the next activity.